everybody for coming. Thank you, Monica. Sure. Very happy to have Monica Guzman with us. If you pay any attention to media and technology in this town, you've come across Monica. She's one of the more prominent voices in the Seattle tech community. She writes for both the Seattle Times and Geekwire as well. Perhaps the city's best example of old media and new media, and you have a foot in both. She's also a frequent contributor to NPR and does a podcast for PBS as well. Monica joined the National Advisory Board of the Poynter Institute for Media Studies in St. Petersburg, Florida in 2012. That same year, she was selected as a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Shapers community. She is a recipient of the 2011 and 2012 Northwest Excellent in Journalism Award for Best Online Commentary. She's been named one of the top 100 women in Seattle tech and one of Poynter Institute's 35 social media influencers. She's also been selected as the Society of Professional Journalists 20 journalists to follow on Twitter. I could go on and on, but I think you have a good sense just through that summary of her accomplishments, what a treat it is to have Monica here. Of course, it would be inappropriate for me to mention she was also once voted Seattle's sexiest blogger, so I won't.
I need to take that off the site.
So Monica, again, thank you. You have, as I mentioned, sort of one foot in the print world, one in digital. Your experience includes a column with the Seattle PI, which sort of went cold turkey on print and moved to online only. Now you're with the Seattle Times, who's taken a more gradual approach in moving to digital. Is there a right answer for traditional media companies as they move into digital?
Yeah, that's been the last 5 or 6 years, just the existential crisis of journalism. And it used to be the industry's own little problem, and now it's very clear that it's a public issue and that everybody's interested in some way in where media is going. Is there a right answer? I think that what media organizations are figuring out is that what matters is who your audience is and how you best reach them. And for the most part, only print is not really a right answer for any audience. Everybody's online in some way. Some are online more than others, but still, it's still largely online. What happened with the Seattle PI, how many of you are from the area, by the way? Okay, so not everybody. In St. Patrick's Day of 2009 was the last day that the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, the oldest newspaper in Washington State, published. After more than 100 years, it was the saddest day. It was also the first day of the online-only site that kind of survived out of that. So I was one of maybe 10 reporters out of a staff of 170 that remained to do the online-only site. I stayed with them for a year, and I saw some pretty incredible transformations, just ways that an organization that was used to thinking about print first went to thinking about digital first. And some of the changes were really cool and really interesting. And some of them I think were not. And so I could go on and on about all of that. But yeah, there were years where 2009 was a really rough year because it was the recession. The Rocky Mountain News in Colorado also closed, a large print daily. The PI closed. There were just layoffs in journalism all over the place. Nowadays, though, there's a sense like things are just a lot more optimistic in the industry. And we have site like organizations like Vox Media and Verge, and a bunch of these new Politico's doing fantastic. A bunch of these new sites that are doing really, really, really well and showing the way forward and actually becoming a new sort of power in the media world. It's really, really cool. And if you watch like the disclosures with Edward Snowden, maybe you know about Glenn Greenwald, who's the journalist behind that. He's partnering with this bajillionaire to start a new site, and everybody's really interested in what's going on there. Places like the Washington Post and the New York Times, which used to be the destination for journalists, like once you got to the New York Times, there was nowhere else to go. Those places just lost a couple of reporters who actually left to go to online sites. Ezra Klein, if any of you follow political news and commentary, he was at the Washington Post. The story is that he went to the Washington Post leadership and said, I want to sort of own this blog. I want to do more with it. I need money. I need you guys to support me. And the Post said, "Mwah." So he went off and he's joined Vox Media. I believe it's Vox from Verge. I think it's Vox Media. But that was a huge story.
The Bill Simmons, the Nate Silver.
Right. So Nate Silver left the New York Times, and for the same reason. So the whole industry's kind of like shaken up. This power structure that used to be pretty much the print newspapers at the top is being shaken up, and they're starting to share a little bit of that. So yeah, I think it's the audience. I think it's how well you serve the audience. And I think it's a realization that you don't just serve your audience with your content. You serve your audience with your entire product. So if you have a print publication or an online site, but the ads are horrible, or it's just ugly, it doesn't have the right feeling for the audience to like build a relationship with that organization. So you're seeing a lot of these news sites build their entire product around whatever voice they're picking, whatever audience they're trying to draw. So it's a rambling answer.
No, it's
I could have
great.
gone a bunch of places with
No,
it.
you mentioned the Seattle PI. I still have one of the T-shirts of the vulture on top of the iconic PI globe.
Yep.
From the day they closed.
Yeah, that was rough.
Yeah.
Definitely rough.
So you mentioned some of these new media companies, like The Verge and Vox, and some of the struggles that, whether it be the Times or the Washington Post or others, have had in retaining talent. Are we being fair to newspapers when we paint them as a dying medium? Even to call it old media, as I did in talking about the Times, feels like a little bit of a pejorative.
Yeah.
So is that fair to talk about them in that way?
I don't think so. Ultimately, no. I don't think it's a dying... Well, the newspaper itself, the paper might in some ways be endangered, and I think a lot of people understand that. But the people who are putting together most of the nation's newspapers are also putting together most of the nation's news websites. So these are the same people. So to say that there are people who do newspapers and they are old, well, those same people are also doing pretty amazing things online, and they're experimenting and they're figuring it out. So that in that way, it's not fair. But as for the future of the print medium, that's where things get interesting. Now, I will say this. A few years ago, even when the PI went down, the paper went down, I would have been more confident in saying that papers are going to die. The newspaper experience is going to die. Now, I sit in front of my laptop and I try to read a long article and I can't do it. I pull out my Kindle and I can. I pull out my iPad and I can, but I kind of can't because there's a voice in my head going, check Facebook, check your email. But there is something to be said for some media theorists have called it the laid back experience. When you're the lean back experience, when you're lean forward into your computer and you're reading quick headlines and you're reading tweets and you're reading a story, but maybe only the first couple graphs and you're kind of skimming and you just want what's important. When you have a newspaper in your hand, people lean back and read it and absorb it. And it's what we're seeing with the Kindle. And people are thinking, what's the future of sort of long-form journalism? And it might be more of this tablet thing because the laptop, it just doesn't feel right. The smartphone is a hard thing to do long-form reading on. So these are genuine differences that I think that is not going to go away. I think the lean-back experience is not going to go away. Will it be on a paper or will it be on a Kindle or a reader? That's a good question, but it's not going to go away.
So if we have those challenges around long form with some devices, and then you also have these traditional print companies that are doing great work online, the challenge there is that the advertising dollars haven't followed.
Yeah.
And so the revenue is not as great typically for online properties versus print.
Yep.
So when you have a combination of a resistance to long form or some obstacles and lower advertising revenue, one of the challenges that I see with journalism in general is who is going to fund investigative journalism? What role does it have? Because it's been newspapers that have done such a tremendous job of keeping the government in check, keeping companies in check, very in-depth, long-form reporting. Who does that now?
Yeah, that's a very good question for the industry right now. What a lot of people don't know, because newspapers have been struggling for the last decade, is that for a long time, newspapers had among the highest profit margins of any business. Investigative reporting was able to happen because of those high profit margins. And they were able to let one journalist basically not have a byline for months because he or she was working on something pretty deep and pretty big, and it took a lot of their time. That is a lot harder to accomplish, but not impossible. The Seattle Times has won 2 Pulitzers in the last 4 years, and one of them was for investigative reporting, and it was last year, 2 years ago. So it happens, and I think they focus on it for different reasons. How it's getting funded now is very interesting. We're seeing news organizations crop up that are just for investigative reporting. There's actually one locally here called Investigate West that was born out of people who left the Seattle PI, were laid off at the Seattle PI, and were excellent investigative reporters. They banded together and they created Investigate West. Their model is grant supported, foundation supported, and then they end up selling or just distributing their stories. They don't have their own site, but they might give it to MSNBC or sell it to MSNBC, or they might run it in the Seattle Times. So they don't have to worry about maintaining their own site, but they do have to apply to foundations and grants, and there's a lot of problem with that. The economy, the recession made that hard. Others, like Crosscut, you guys know Crosscut here locally? They're not investigative journalism so much as just thoughtful, very thoughtful long-form journalism, and they are membership and foundation supported. So the membership model is very interesting. Geekwire, which I write for, not investigative journalism, but a very interesting case in terms of revenue. About 1/3 of their revenue, last I checked, came from events. So if you guys are in the tech space and you know that Geekwire does a lot of events, that's a really good source of revenue.
Anniversary party coming up on March 20th.
There you go, the ping pong tournament.
Plug
So
for that,
yeah, and they do the Geekwire Awards every year, and that's a big deal. And what Geekwire's been able to do that I love so much is, I was talking before about the product has to speak in the same voice as the content, right? And for a long time, ads have just been an aside to content. So the way that news organizations have made their revenue has not necessarily been with a monetizable entity that says the same thing as their content. But sites like Geekwire, the Texas Tribune down in Texas, California Watch in California, are finding ways to monetize their content that actually accomplish the goals of their site, of their news organization. So Geekwire's events bring the community together. Geekwire's events help Seattle's tech scene kind of bond. And business deals come out of those. Big things come out of those. It's the place where people see each other. So they've managed to build that, and I think that ends up accomplishing part of the mission of the whole site, and it helps monetize the site.
Yep.
So I would rather news organizations monetize in ways that also give value to their audience, rather than in just, let's see what we can force people to watch. Let's see what we can force them. Let's see what we can put in front of them that they won't hate so much that they'll never come back.
Yep.
It's kind of nice.
Yeah. You mentioned that Geekwire is not about investigative journalism. I was really surprised when I saw that Pando Daily, who I sort of think of as the Geekwire of the Valley in a sense, that they came out in a pretty big way with some investigative journalism around PBS, and some what they sort of portrayed as fraudulent funding of PBS that was influencing some of the programming they did, and in the end, PBS returned a $3.5 million grant. Mm-hmm. I did not expect Pando Daily to do that kind of reporting, and so you mentioned Verge and Vox and others, and I get the sense that there are going to be these companies that hopefully do fill that void, that maybe they come from places we don't even expect.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think it's a little bit like, I studied film in college I'm making a point, trust me. I studied film in college, and the rise of the blockbuster movie is very interesting. For a long time, studios would just crank out and make tons of movies, and the idea was that all the movies would sort of share the revenue for the whole company, just in a way. And then the blockbuster movie came out, and they realized that putting all their, everything in one basket for this Jaws, took care of the whole year. And I feel like, in a sense, when a news organization figures out its audience and actually knows who they are and can line them up and ask them some questions and say, you probably read Geekwire because you work in technology. It means I can serve you better, right? The more that you know your audience, then I think the more strongly you can pinpoint investigative pieces that become blockbusters. And by blockbuster, I mean, already the online space means that geography doesn't matter, right? So a Seattle Times story about Microsoft competes with a New York Times story about Microsoft and a Huffington Post story about Microsoft. And that's just the way it is. Seattle Times doesn't have some monopoly on Microsoft coverage just because we're here. So that means that the blockbuster can now be a national, even global blockbuster story. So the better you know your audience and what they want, and the better you know what's going to really like provoke them and make them angry, you know, the more that you can build up to those investigative pieces. So the more cohesive that voice throughout the whole product, I think the stronger the journalism we're going to see.
Yeah, great. I want to touch just a little bit more on not just the organizations that are transitioning into digital, but the actual people and the journalists. You're somebody who's been a very early adopter of new channels and new technologies, whether it be the big blog at the PI or Twitter or even the meetups that you've organized. You traveled to El Salvador on a State Department grant to work with journalists and teach them about new technology. So very much on the forefront. Is it reasonable to think that traditional journalists, you know, those the ink-stained journalists that have spent decades in print, is it fair to expect them to make that full transition to digital and to embrace new technologies in the way that you have so naturally?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, what wouldn't have been fair to expect is that those technologies would have come as naturally as maybe they did to me. I'm in that generation that some people call digital natives, that we just kind of grew up with this stuff, and it's just not that big a deal. It's not that weird. But particularly with things like privacy, going on Twitter several years ago for a lot of more traditional journalists it just didn't compute. It doesn't make sense. Why would wait, you want me to talk about my day and my work? That doesn't, why, to who? I don't understand. Yeah. So it didn't come naturally. But you've seen, I think we've all seen, a lot of great traditional journalists rise to, found Politico and do some amazing things. Jim Brady, who worked at the Washington Post and a bunch of great places for decades, started Digital First Media. Anyway, there's just, clearly it can happen. I think it's just embracing, what's out there and being open to it. And I've seen some, older traditional journalists, it's more about personality. Some people kind of, for whatever reason, they're like, no, I'm comfortable where I'm at and that's it. But there's also plenty of people who are able to just kind of change with the times, and that's been the big difference. But this has been the biggest change in the industry, I don't know, in a very, very long time. Yeah. So it's, and for a lot of reasons, that private-public distinction, all these things, the idea that online, that there's all these trolls and commenters just ruining our material anyway. There are some really interesting reasons why there was resistance in the early days, but that was in the early days. I think right now all journalists know, if you're not with the digital thing at this point, you've probably already left the industry.
Yeah. Well, it's as it is more commonplace now. Even going back to the PI, just 5 short years ago. At that time, if I'm not mistaken, the 10 or so reporters that were left on staff were essentially those digital natives, right? So it wasn't about
not
people making a transition.
but a lot of us, some of us.
Yeah.
But I will say this, because I was at that point very gung-ho about digital, and I think back on this because I was the only, at the paper PI, I was the only online-only reporter. So I was experimenting with working at an online-only site before anybody else, right? And once we knew we were going to online only, and it was so rough and so hard, but I thought, okay, we're going to have everything we need. We can do this. What I didn't realize I would miss as much as I did was all the human encyclopedias and human heartbeats of the city that walked out that door. And sure, we can tweet away, we can aggregate as much as we want, but that knowledge, that institutional knowledge of having been in the area for decades is irreplaceable. Yeah. And I hated that they left. I hated that we let them go. I hated that they had to leave. Why? That was so important. And so I don't think, I don't think that charging forward means leaving everything behind.
Yeah. Even, Art Thiel was one of those that left the PI, and I thought and still think he was, the best sports columnist in the city, and arguably just one of the best writers. Period.
And he still is. He started Sports Press,
but he doesn't quite have that. I think it's a great property, and clearly very focused on great Seattle sports news, but he doesn't quite have the platform that he did.
Yeah, he doesn't have a platform. He's working on it. He's building it, and
he is.
I think he can do it.
Yeah,
he's working hard for it.
Yeah,
but,
if not him, then who? I guess.
Yeah, but it is
great.
hard. It is hard.
Yeah.
But we saw a lot of entrepreneurial journalists come out of the PI sort of disbanding and people discovering things in themselves they didn't know they had.
Yeah.
And that's been really cool to see.
Yeah, very much so. Earlier you mentioned, reading long form and having your iPad and having this, sense that you needed to check Facebook or check email.
I can't read on the iPad.
Yeah, so you gave a talk, an Ignite talk about unplugging. So how hard was it for you? How hard is it for you to unplug, to not be checking Facebook, to not be checking Twitter? How hard is it, and then how important is it to do that on occasion?
Yeah, I've evolved my thinking on this in the last 2-3 years. So what I did for a while there, I did an Ignite talk, a 5-minute talk on. I was doing no tech Sundays, and I did it for months and months and months. And I stopped when I started my Sunday Seattle Times column that I had to promote online, and well, there it goes. And I had to post it on Saturday nights, so I couldn't do it Saturdays, and I have to work on Monday, so there you go. Can't do no tech Sundays anymore. But I used to do no tech Sundays, and they were amazing. And literally, I would just take my phone and just put it in this drawer and close it, and it would not come out all day. One of the hardest things was getting around, because I am hopeless when it comes to driving anywhere. Even someplace I've been to 20 times, I'll just forget. So I actually had to ask my husband to print out directions or print out directions the day before and try to actually learn how to get places. That was really hard. But no, actually, seriously, the hardest thing was just your brain. Your brain, I don't think we realize how our brains have changed. To think in these short little bursts, and I'm convinced I have a little countdown clock in my head since the last time I checked my email. Just constant. And it used to just be during work hours. Not anymore.
Yep.
Constant, just boom. And even at home when I'm, cooking dinner, whatever, I'm putting something in the microwave. The microwave, beeps that the food is ready. And those 5 seconds that it beeps, I go, oh, let me check my phone. Everything is just, oh, let me check my phone. I'm stirring the food, oh, let me check my phone. Everything, it's always there. And so I've been working on actually having it in another room, just things like that. But it's my biggest concern is what it does to my brain. And how my brain is basically always a little bit anxious and always a little bit, what's going on? What do I need to know about? What do I need to know about? What do I need to know about? So last year, I wrote a column for the Seattle Times about 1 week vacation I took in Colorado with my family that I decided would be a week of disconnection. Oh my God, I swear, I forgot what that was like, and it was just so amazing. It was so amazing. I was able to sort of pay attention to my surroundings in a way I hadn't in a very long time. There was one time, a couple years back, where I realized it was night, and I was looking through Twitter, and there were these gorgeous photos of the Seattle sunset, and I had taken the bus home that night and walked, and I hadn't seen the sunset because I was like this. And it wasn't until Twitter that night that I saw the freaking sunset. And that's just life these days, You're just like this. So it was really nice to reconnect. It's that idea of when you have your phone is basically a representation of your world. It is your customized, built just for you world. And when it goes up against the world around you, it always wins. Because you've built it to be exactly what you think is most interesting or most important, right? So no matter where you are, you're waiting in line at the bank, you're waiting for a friend at a restaurant, we don't wait anymore.
Yep.
We just have things to do. We always have things to do. We can always have things to do. Everywhere you go, things to do. So this world, competing with the world around you, just always wins. So when you let that world go and reconnect with the world around you, it's just it just feels like a different brain.
Yeah, I mean, it's a perfect example of not seeing the sunset because you're staring at your phone and then finally seeing it on Twitter.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's just insult to injury almost,
Just kind of absurd.
Yeah. So shift gears a little bit here. You do a lot of work and advise a number of startups in the Seattle area. How does your work with startups intersect with your journalism and your writing, if at all?
Yeah, so lately, I haven't been doing a lot of advising on startups. I've focused much more on my writing. I did advise for a while, and it was a lot of fun. One startup called Trover, it's a mobile app, and one called Glimpse. I don't know if anyone's heard of Glimpse. It's Glympse. It's the location-aware thing. And yeah, I mean, one thing that a lot of people who work in journalism and then sort of go into marketing or outreach in startups say is that it is nice to know how, when you have the journalist sensibility and you understand what the public is interested in, and then you go into a company, it's a little bit easier to just remember what the public is interested in. Yep. So that if somebody in the company is suggesting something a little over there, you're like, wait, I don't know. Like you just develop this kind of gut sense for what is actually interesting. And that really has to do with every product. I mean, as you guys know, every tech company is a media company. Every tech company is a media company. You gotta have a blog, you gotta put out content, people wanna keep up with you. If you wanna build a relationship with your users, which everyone does, then you have to be speaking to them. And so a lot of startups have realized that they need some of that sense of what's really interesting. And that's something journalists work on very hard without even realizing it. So that's probably the thing that helped the most. Yeah, and it's surprising sometimes, like when you're the journalist in the room and you're like, no guys, this is not interesting. And I goes, really? Like, yeah, don't you see? Like, really? And it, sometimes it's a bit of a battle, and then eventually like, oh, okay. Yeah. But then on the other side, one of the things I took away from working with startups, and I worked with a startup called Intersect for a year as their director of outreach, and it was fascinating, was what working in a team was really like. Because when you work in a team in a newsroom, you don't work in a team. It's total BS. You journalists have their own vertical, their own path to glory, and they report and they write, and more these days they pick their own headline and they send it out and they tweet it and they put it on Facebook, and they're kind of responsible for the entire vertical of that story. So yeah, you worked with a photographer on that story, but they've got their vertical over here, so you're not really crossing that often. I mean, obviously that's not always true, that's a generalization, but then I went into a startup and I really appreciated you, UX designer, know things that I know nothing about, and I cannot do what I am doing for this site without you. I can't do it. So you actually have to work together, like in really, really cool ways. And actually the woman at Intersect, Nadia Haldeman, who was one of the UX designers, she and I made a deal. I would help her with her sort of writing, her quick writing on Twitter, if she helped me with my photos on Instagram. And so I became a lot better at taking photos, and she became a lot better at writing.
Another area where there's a lot of debate in journalism is whether you call it native advertising, advertorial, sponsored content, this whole idea of editorial and advertising starting to bleed together.
Yeah.
What's your view on what I think is fair to call a trend now?
Yeah, it is.
And where do you see it going, and where should it go if those two things are different?
I think do you guys know what this is? Native advertising? Okay. It's one of those where I have to take a breath before I answer, because I don't want to come off as somebody who hates it, but I hate it. I really hate it. And I'm still trying to figure out why I hate it, because you can't deny that it works. You can't deny that it makes good money. You can't deny that we need good money. All those things are good. I hate it because, coming back to my whole thing, I beat this drum about, like, you speak in one voice. You are letting someone else hijack your product, the building blocks with which you build your trust and your voice and your connection with the audience, and you are letting someone else hijack it for a different purpose. Basically taking, your materials, even your fonts, just the look. I hate that. It just seems wrong to me. But again, there are incredibly smart, wonderful people I respect who see nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's journalism is, maybe it's a little bit of a Pollyanna viewpoint, but it has, I think, been seen as having such high integrity and such a sense of purpose that it's almost this sort of feeling of innocence lost
a little bit
with advertorial.
Yeah, and there's, sites like BuzzFeed doing that, I'm like, whatever. If it's, 20 great things from the 90s, sponsored by State Farm, fine. But not even that fine, but BuzzFeed bugs me because it tries to be so much, and it speaks in so many different voices for so many different purposes, and it bugs me.
Well, yeah, you have somebody like Ben Smith, a respected political reporter.
Yeah.
next to, the 20 cat pictures.
Yeah, and they're
it
building
is
they're
very
building this
strange.
really impressive investigative team I just learned about, and it's going to be wonderful. But like, it's confusing to the reader. Like, what are you really about? It's so disparate, your brand. And I may be proven completely wrong. I think I am being proven wrong, actually, because BuzzFeed is winning everything.
Yeah. Well, and wouldn't it be strange if the 90s, retro slideshows end up being the very thing that funds investigative journalism?
Right. And that's the thing. It's like, if that's what it's got to be, then that's what it's got to be.
Yeah.
But I far prefer, because it happens, there are sites that are doing this, that are able to keep the integrity, speak in one voice, the things they monetize, everything is for serving the community.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Like, that's the ideal journalism. And I don't see a reason why we can't keep fighting for that, even if there are all these other things that work.
Yeah, I don't know if you know or you follow Rafat Ali, the founder of Paid Content, now has Skift, the business travel site.
A little bit, not much.
So he very successful within the industry with paid content, and he's basically said the battle's done. Editorial and advertising come together. You're now one thing. There's no more wall between you. Let's go. All bets are off.
That just makes me cringe.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a lot of really prominent national examples of that working really well, but there are so many regional and local examples of things working really well on a niche level, serving their audience that don't need to do those things. And I wish more attention would be paid to them.
Yeah. So let's talk about something that you don't hate.
Yep.
Service, I know, is important to you. It's something that in previous discussions in the speaker series we've talked about, and we'd just love to know how you think about service. How do you live a lifestyle that's well-rounded and isn't always just focused on technology or just focused on your writing? What role does service play for you?
Well, yeah, there's sort of the work-life balance, as problematic a term that is, and then the service as well. So right now, I actually work Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'm here because it's Tuesday. We have a nanny at home. That's why I'm here. So Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I'm with my 1.5-year-old, who's awesome. So I have gone from someone who went into a newsroom 5 days a week, worked hard, but goofed off here and there and checked Facebook all the time, whatever, to somebody who, like Mondays and Wednesdays when my kid is napping, I work. I cannot believe the amount of focus that goes into my work in those 2 hours. I just, and it's this alarm, like as soon as he cries, it's over, and I can't just snooze the baby. So go. And then Tuesdays and Thursdays between 10 and 6 when the nanny's home, I have to be incredibly focused. And I just do all the work there because Mondays and Wednesdays with my son are just fabulous. And I like enjoying that, and I like not having to worry, and I definitely prefer not to have him there playing and me on the phone, doing stuff. So that's the work-life balance. I feel really, really happy with how we've managed to sort of keep our family, but also keep working on things we care about. So the service part, that's where it helps that both sets of our parents are in town and happy to babysit, because God, we do a lot. Last week I coordinated 2 events for the Society of Professional Journalists, and we're having I'm the vice president of the chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. It's this big national organization with chapters all over the country, and I really care about their mission, which is to sort of advance journalism, make sure that the policy environment is one where journalists can do their job and serve the public well. I really care about bringing local journalists together. Because this is such a crazy period, the only way to learn how to move forward is to talk to each other. Every transition in every industry in transition, that's the only way. Nobody's written the textbook, and whoever thinks they've written the textbook, it's out of date in 6 months. So you have to talk to each other. And you have to do it locally, not just nationally, where only the New York Times and Washington Post have the money to go. You need to be able to do it here. So I care a lot about that. I put a lot of time into that. I talked about an Ignite talk. You guys ever been to Ignite Seattle? Ever heard of it? So Ignite, very briefly, Ignite is a 5-minute talk, 20 slides, auto advance every 15 seconds. That's an Ignite talk. I'm the MC for Ignite Seattle, which is 700, 800 people come to Town Hall Seattle every quarter and watch 16 grab bag talks from people in the community, many of whom have never spoken in public before. We have 2 speaker coaching sessions to help people like tell their stories. And they're fun, and they're geeky, but not in the tech sense. They're geeky in the sense that, ooh, I really love this. I'm gonna tell you why. So come out because it's really fun. But I put in some time into that and being an organizer on that because I believe really strongly in people being able to tell their own stories. Journalism has always been about we tell your stories because you can't. Well, now you can.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of great ways you can. So I worked at the startup Intersect because it was a way to let people tell their own stories in a really cool way. So I'm all about that. Like, if I can help tell your story, awesome. But if you can tell your own story, great. I want to help do that too. So that's a bit of my giving back. Like it's also just me thinking that would make for a better world if we were all more empowered to tell our own stories, and that's just, kumbaya, more understanding, peace in the world, etc.
No, great.
Yeah.
Good. Well, why don't we take the rest of our time and open it up to some questions from the audience. Jeff.
Hi, Monica.
Hi.
So earlier you mentioned that long-form journalism is having a hard time because of the crazy amount of monetization of news.
Yep.
So right now, what do you think are 3 good places to go on the internet to find quality long-form journalism?
Good question. Number 1 is long reads. Have you ever heard of long reads?
No.
Oh man. Okay. Long reads. I believe it's longreads.com, but they literally do exactly what you asked for. They gather the best long-form journalism, and it's a blog, but it's a very good blog, and they've got partnerships all over the place. There's also, I think it actually grew out of a Twitter hashtag long reads, and then it became a website. So if you're in the mood for like a really good kind of juicy, you've got your iPad and you're ready to just dive in, longreads.com. And they have community ratings, so they'll sort of rate which one is the most interesting and whatever. But yeah, all the best long-form journalism gets there very, very quickly. So I don't even know that I would give more. Because, from all over, great story from the New Yorker, great story from the New York Times, great story from the Atlantic, will all get to long reads. Yeah.
And I find it's not a destination site necessarily, more of a tool, but I find Instapaper to be fantastic for longer form journalism because, like you often don't want to get distracted on by Facebook or email or anything else. But when you have Instapaper, you can save it later.
Yeah.
It strips out all the ads, just the content.
Yeah, that's kind of nice. I use one called Pocket.
Yeah, Pocket's great as well.
Pocket's really good. What's funny is, for about 2 years, I used Instapaper, but the only way I would use it is to put things in Instapaper, and I never actually went and read it, ever. It was just my way of getting rid of the guilt of not having time right now. Like throw it in there.
Not having
but literally,
30 tabs
never
open in Chrome,
ever
right?
went to read it. Yeah, but Pocket's a little easier. And before I get on a plane, I make sure like things are kind of downloaded. Although now I don't know. That's right. Now you can leave everything on. No, it's still in airplane mode. Anyway, but yeah, I sort of take out my phone and read my Pocket on flights a lot these days. But yeah, it is a good tool.
Other questions?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you saw, but a couple of years ago, the New York Times in their app did an interactive story about the avalanche.
Oh my God, yes.
Snowfall.
So
Snowfall.
Right. So that to me was like the changing of like that experience, because that to me was just unbelievable that you had all that information and the video and the phone
It was
calls.
nuts.
So how do you look at that as, because you said, I hate my reading stories on my iPad.
Yeah.
But that was such an incredible experience. So
Yeah.
see the
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. That came out in December 2012. I want to say it was like December 14th or 15th. Like, I remember the day because I was on my computer and I was seeing this buzz about this thing on New York Times that had just come out, and I was like, huh. And I just kind of looked at it on my computer, and I just sort of got a quick sense of what I was in for, and I was like, wait, Jason, where's your iPad? And grabbed the iPad, sat down, and for the next 2.5 hours, read that story, and did not stop, and was in tears, and couldn't believe it, and I stopped at 2 in the morning, and went to bed. And it was one of those you couldn't even sleep because it was still ooh. Like when I finished Breaking Bad or the last Harry Potter book. Oh my God, I can't sleep. So yeah, that was one of those that I immediately recognized, I need the iPad.
But have you seen anything that comes close to it?
No. Although New York Times did another one, and it was about a jockey.
Yeah.
On sailing too.
There's one on sailing.
I read actually, the funny thing was I read the one actually in the newspaper
Yeah.
beforehand because it came out in print.
Oh, you read it in the newspaper first.
You know, the paper thing.
So you could definitely tell the difference in the experience.
Why
But
isn't there
my
more?
God. Oh, there's a very good reason there's not more of that. Two big criticisms of snowfall that I completely back. One is, and I'm not going to get the details right anymore because I've forgotten, but it was something like 11 people for like 4 or 5 months working on that story. Are you crazy? Nobody can do that. Only the New York Times can do. Nobody can do that. So one of the things that got very annoying about Snowfall becoming the hit that it was is everyone around the country was like, but we can't do this. Nobody can do this. This is so hard. We're not there yet. But obviously, kudos to the New York Times for showing the way forward because, once you realize your target, you find easier ways to get there. So that's one. That's why nobody's doing it. It's really, 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 really hard. How many of you read Snowfall, by the way? Do you know what we're talking about? Okay. Crazy interactive story, animations you wouldn't believe, like videos integrated into the text, no ads, right? Like this large, just immersive experience, beautiful experience, like just wow, but insanely expensive. Second criticism that's been levied against Snowfall that I think is compelling is why did they choose to spend all these resources on telling a captivating, life-changing story about an avalanche where a couple people died, of course, instead of, say, the healthcare crisis? Or, explain that. Man, if they had snowfalled the healthcare crisis, where would we be today? You know what I mean? Like, why sports? Why that? I'm not saying sports is amazing, but if you're able to give those resources to something, why that? So that's been an interesting criticism. But no, snowfall has become a verb in journalism circles. Can we snowfall that? You think we could snowfall that? So no, it's being talked about, and a lot of people are trying, but getting there again is going to be really hard. But they're getting close. I think people are learning a lot. So I think in the next few years, I hope we see that as a more regular way to experience the news, because that's a beautiful way to experience the news.
Though it's interesting, Snowfall, as you said, didn't have any advertising. Even over the last few days, there's been a lot of talk in advertising about how ham-handed traditional advertising looks when placed in snowfall type environments.
Yeah, you can't.
Because you have this beautiful interactivity, as you said,
Right.
sort of sight, sound, and motion.
Yeah.
And then just a ugly display ad that
Well,
is plugged
the
in
book is
middle.
the perfect example. Imagine running into a book in the middle of Harry Potter.
Yeah.
I mean, no, sorry, an ad in the middle of
Yeah,
Harry Potter.
yeah.
It's not acceptable there, because we know an immersive experience has to be immersive. So it's a challenge for all you ad people.
But even if it's the same challenge that journalists face, the expense of a snowfall.
Yeah.
If you deliver an ad that has the same beauty and interactivity, it's more expensive.
Yeah.
And so for advertisers,
True.
they have to sort of step up their game and have a belief that a more powerful interactive ad
It works.
is worth paying more for.
I think so. In fact, I think some of my favorite ads that ever run online are the ones on the homepage of the New York Times,
Yeah.
which are top dollar.
Yep.
But when they drop down or take over, it's cool.
Yeah.
But no other ad that drops down and takes over. All of those just piss me off.
Yeah.
And I start reading a story and I'm already pissed off. So that brand, that news site I'm on, just loses a little bit because I'm already pissed off.
Yeah.
That there's some goddamn ad over here flashing in my face and it's ugly as sin. That doesn't help anyone.
Yeah.
So
Well, but it does pay.
well, yes. Yes.
That pays
It
for the journalist.
generates revenue that pays for the journalist. That's
Which-
very true.
I have a quick follow-up question.
Yeah.
So you were talking about how these syndicated stories, whether they're sold to MSNBC or whatever the distribution point is, it seems like there's some revenue that can be generated from a relationship like that.
Mm-hmm.
But you talked about how when the journalist or the paper knows their audience really well and they know exactly who they're speaking to,
Yeah.
first thing that came to my mind is, well, if you know exactly who they're speaking to, then you know what that person wants.
Yep.
Which means you can go right to that advertiser that makes
Yeah.
sense. Isn't that native advertising really in a way which you hate?
No, because you don't hijack the format that is used to speak the news. You don't hijack the same exact look and feel. But yeah, that's true. And there are sites that do that well. One of the reasons I mentioned, once you can line people up and say, I'll bet 70% that person reads my site, is you can build things like Geekwire's job board. They make revenue off that too. And they know how it's useful, and they know how to kind of sell it to their audience. And they can sell, they partner with advertisers that like have interesting conferences coming into town. So that ad about that conference is a valuable ad. People are really happy they know about it. So there aren't ads on Geekwire about losing belly fat in 2 days. And that's nice. But I know that those ads, those are remnant ads. I know that, you have to make that money. You can't have empty space. I get that. But no, I don't think it's native advertising. Native advertising is it looks like an article, it smells like an article, it's not an article. That's what that is. Yeah.
So my question is, you probably get pitched a lot. So
Right.
I'd love to hear kind of the worst pitch.
Oh, yeah.
And then ones that actually work.
I love this question. So like the best pitch, my God, the best possible pitches are just a couple of sentences, or sometimes a couple sentences at the top and then some paragraphs below, but that just sum up why you should be interested in this, why this is interesting to your readers, why I think you would be interested in this. The worst press releases are the ones that clearly went to a bajillion people, and I'm just one of the list, and they're not even what I cover. Like I've been on this list of XOXO something or other, blah, blah, publicity or something, and they keep sending me like, the subject line is all caps, so-and-so's playing their CD release show, like, can we line up an interview? Can I speak to you? Like, I don't even write, what are you doing? And I don't know how many times I've asked to be taken off that list. So those lists are lists though, right? They're more like, they're media spam. I know that there's media spam. But when you're actually pitching someone, there's absolutely no need to do like, for immediate release, blah, 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 blah. I mean, I can read that and it's fine. And if it's interesting, honestly, I don't care how it comes to me. I've done this long enough that I can kind of read between the lines if I need to. But it's really nice when I don't need to read between the lines. And when somebody tells me directly why something should be interesting. And it's also good to, when I respond and say, actually this probably isn't, it's not the time, or I'd like to keep it on my radar. Recently I had somebody who really wanted coffee with me to talk about their company. Like really, really, really wanted it. And I kept saying, look, I have Tuesdays and Thursdays. I need to write my 2 columns. I really have to be careful how I use my time. I'm happy to answer look at stuff over email, and I'll call you if I think there's something here, but I don't write about companies for their own sake. I write about stories. So blah, blah, blah. And I really explained that to him. And then the next day, so how about next Monday? No, stop. And that guy is not my favorite guy right now. So, when I run into him, I'll be like, hello. But I've heard from people in PR, and this is a very interesting situation, that it used to be several years ago, many years ago, that you could have coffee with a journalist and just get to know them without there being a particular story to pitch. And people had time for that because I already wrote tomorrow's story. I've got that. I don't have all these online deadlines I've got to be all about. I don't have ways like Twitter or Facebook to just quickly glean little bits of things, to just determine whether I actually want to go forward with spending that time with you. So I've heard them say God, it was nice back then because we could just get to know them, build that relationship and build a pitch off of that. And it's true. It's harder to do that now. It is much, much harder. And journalists have completely different ways of thinking about their time. For me right now, it's particularly tight. But it's not true for everybody. And I love making in-person connections with people in communications. That's really, really nice. Putting a face to a name is really, really nice. I wish I had more time to do it proactively. It's usually at events. I run into people oh, your communication for so-and-so, what's going on, And that's a nice no stress. But if it's my email and it's a work day, it's got to be just really direct and just get to me because I get so many emails and everything just, It's kind of the lean back and lean in thing again, If you're at an event and you've got your drink, you're lean back. And you can bring in some more of that spontaneity. But if you're in your email, it's just, oh my God. It's hard. It's stressed out. Yeah.
You talked about a variety of different ways of funding good journalism, but touch on paywalls. I'm curious what your thoughts are. If it's a completely dated model or if it's viable and if it's desirable.
I think it is. I think the porous paywall that the New York Times sort of innovated on seems to be working. And it's porous because there's a bunch of ways around it, right? If you get in through a tweet, you can get there. But they banked on, and they're right, that a lot of people don't want to hack their way into things. They're okay paying some money to get something they value, and that's fine. So their number of digital subscribers keeps climbing, and they seem to be doing well. It's obviously not caught up to print subscribers and all that, but again, I mean, when geography breaks down and you can serve digital customers all over the world the same way, it's a huge potential market. So yeah, I think paywalls are great. I think paywalls are harder to pull off in local markets than national ones because you don't have such a huge pool to draw from. The Seattle Times started its paywall not too long ago, and they're happy with it. I'm happy with it. I think it's good. And it's also porous. There's a certain number of articles, and it's like a little secret algorithm like Google's, right? Like, maybe if you read the comics, it doesn't count against you, or maybe it does. Like, we don't know, we're not going to tell you. But eventually you see that little sign that says, please pay. It'd be really nice if you paid. We got to pay these guys. And yeah. So that, that got some resistance years ago, and it's getting a lot less resistance now. And I think we're going to remember the early 2000s as the golden age of free information. Because it is kind of ending, but because it has to.
Other questions?
I just had a question on, with the transition online versus the print days, how has the kind of editing function and proofreading of content changed for both you and for the media company as well, with the need to push content much faster?
Yeah.
Is that a source of anxiety, or has that changed a lot over the years?
Yeah, it's definitely a source of anxiety. Breaking news especially. When I first, at the PI in 2007, when I started using Twitter, and I asked them if I could put one of those little widgets on the side of my blog that shows the tweets, their first thing was, we got to talk to a lawyer, we may have to edit those tweets. I'm like, you're not going to edit my tweets. You're not going to edit my tweet. Well, you're not going to edit my tweets. So it's been this, understanding of the medium. You can't edit every reporter's tweets. But if you don't let reporters tweet, you're missing out on a big buzz machine for their content, for your content and your brand, right? So there's been this really like this tug back and forth. And journalists have made some mistakes on social media. They give too much away. They act inappropriately, disrespectfully. They've been fired for things they've said. It happens. It doesn't happen that much. I think for the most part, people know how to behave like professionals on social media. We're past that now. We're past the time when like every month some newspaper had a story about, employers are looking at their candidates on Facebook, be careful. Like, I think we know. I think we get it now. We know to be careful. But anyway, that goes somewhere else. But as far as editing, I don't think that being online and having the crazy news cycle is an excuse for not being very careful. And I think for a few years there, some media entities treated it as a bit of excuse. Now, there's a difference between the thing that I think the public is understanding more than ever before is that news is and has always been a process. It has never been a product. It's not something you report your story, you write it, you finish it, and there it is, it's done. And it used to be, journalists used to be able to treat it that way. Because like maybe you'd get a letter to the editor, but probably not. It was just a product and you just let it go. And now a news story has a life and you are to follow its life. Or at least I think if you're a good journalist, you do. You make yourself open and available to editing it. So in a developing story, like take the Boston Manhunt, the Boston Marathon manhunt was insane. Like the relationship between public and journalists did like this huge seismic shift that night. It was insane. And we're still figuring out what lessons to take from that. But, oh God, where was I going with that? Shoot. Anyway, you can probably tell like just the major theme. News is an evolving thing. News is an evolving thing. Like, you don't immediately know as soon as the suspects were taken to custody. Like, I think the public has always assumed somebody knows. Like enough people know, it's just that the journalists aren't telling us. Like, no, actually, there's a lot of confusion when breaking news happens. The police commissioner heard on the scanner that this or that, but they just got a call that it might be this guy, but they're not quite sure. So in those few minutes, nobody knows for sure, let alone the journalists, right? So I think we're realizing that this stuff is very organic. And so the fact that we used to have a whole day to get the stuff right before we told you was nice. And now people don't give us that anymore. And that's good. They shouldn't. Why? You know why? And that Boston Marathon thing, one of the most fascinating aspects of that was how many people listened to the Boston police scanner. Thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of people, including myself. I stayed up all night. And I had that scanner on like it was, TV, like reality TV. And as a journalist, I was a cops reporter in Houston. I know that what police say on the scanner is actionable information for them to do their jobs. Cops need to be able to say, I think that this is happening, even if it's not something that the PR person of the police department would be able to say to the public. But if they're not able to say that, how the heck are they going to communicate with each other? So what happened there was, of course, that information was treated as totally public, true information. And rumors started spreading really quickly around all over the place. And the police department had to tweet out, guys, stop. We think the suspect might even be on Twitter, so can you please, which was hard. But anyway, so all of this is being opened, so much more information is public that it's not just the trained journalist who is in there dissecting it and synthesizing it and shipping it and packaging it and putting it out. It's everybody. So in a way, I think there's two things happening. The journalists are learning that, no, you absolutely need to be careful. But the public is also learning that this is you learn it as you go. And there's not just one moment something happens and it's a race to find out what it was. No, it's a bunch of people you need to put the pieces together. The truth does not exist in some little locked room nobody's gotten to yet. You know what I mean? It's not a race to that locked room. You actually have to put it together. And time needs to pass. So the more we understand that, then yeah, if there's a little bit of forgiveness of just oh, this is a human process, then that's okay. But it's still not an excuse to not be incredibly careful when you say someone's died when they haven't, or something like that. That is the worst. Yeah.
Well, Monica, thank you for joining us for the March edition of The Mix. As a news junkie myself, thank you for your incredible insights, fascinating your view on journalism. And lastly, thank you for the role you play in the tech community. I think you're a great voice and contribute to the thriving industry that we have here in Seattle. So thank you so much.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's fun.